Hi everybody, it's Marnie Wedlake. This is course content for the week of March 30th and 31st. It's our last week of classes this week. And our topic for this week is resilience and the creation of well-being. The readings we had assigned for this week were chapter 15 from Surviving Survival, Lawrence Gonzalez's book, a chapter from The Tao of Pooh, and we had a reading from a publication called The Noble Eightfold Path, The Way to the End of Suffering, a Buddhist publication. And the stuff we're going to focus on today is Lawrence Gonzalez, The Rules of Life, from chapter 15 of his book, Surviving Survival. The rules that can help someone survive a natural disaster or a wilderness emergency can also be used to help us thrive in the aftermath of survival. The people who successfully negotiate their lives in the aftermath of trauma tend to follow well-worn pathways. And I'm hoping that most of the content that we've covered in this class has been relevant to you in some way in your life, or will be relevant to you going forward, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. I'm also hoping that you're finding at least some of this content to be relevant and even helpful to you as we're going through this global crisis. And these 12 rules for life that Lawrence Gonzalez has published, I think, are particularly relevant. So the rules of life are 12 strategies that we can use to help us move forward. And number 1 is want it, need it, have it. Devote yourself passionately to an art, a craft, a musical instrument, a language, a horse, or your own education. When you start, you'll want this. If you keep going with it, you'll need it. Then you'll see that you have it. You'll have your ideal self. So the objective here is to steer ourselves in the direction of moving towards a self that we want to create. So we're in a place where we don't have that self yet, and we're moving towards creating that self. This is about imagining and realizing the self you want to become, the self you want to create. This is about developing an internal locus of control. This is your sense of agency. We've talked about this several times in this course. This is really having to do with this whole idea of sort of being the arbiters of our own destiny and the creators of our own well-being. And this rule number 1 is very much about that. Rule number 2, be here now. This is the strategy of mindfulness. It's about being present. It's about being present enough to see and meet the challenges you're facing. Be here now means be quiet. This is about being honest about your reality and nimble enough to respond to that reality. So we've talked about this. We talked about this actually last week, this idea. You might remember the conversation we had about optimism, and that optimism on its own is not necessarily an enabler of resilience. You know, we need honesty as well. And so if we are honest about our reality and we're optimistic about our future, then we're much more able to respond to what's going on in that reality. Rule number 2 is about enabling you to listen to your gut, to tap into your intuition. That's your sixth sense, your spidey sense. And this is especially useful in times when you'll really need to be able to do this. Call on that gut reaction. Rule number 3 is be patient. Everything takes 8 times as long as it's supposed to. If we know this up front, then when we are taking longer than what we would like to take, we will be less frustrated by that. And the idea is when we're trying to thrive after surviving, we want to be able to minimize the amount of frustration we experience. So remembering that everything takes 8 times as long as it's supposed to be is key. Being patient is key. And this is about surrendering control. This is about letting go of the tendency to cling to the outcome. And it's about trusting in the process. Super tough for lots of us to do, but super essential as well. Number 4 is about being tough. Learn to suffer well. In our classes on suffering, we learned about the importance of suffering. We learned that it is ubiquitous. We learned that suffering is rampant and total. We learned that we really can't get by without it. And we also learned that it really is an essential part of our growth, of our development as a person. To achieve the greatest psychological health, some kind of suffering is necessary. In a world where suffering is inevitable, the only sensible thing is to learn how to deal with it. Incidentally, the reading for this week that we're not going to cover in our class notes today is the reading on the Noble Eightfold Path, The Way to End Suffering, is about this idea of accepting the presence of suffering in our life, and that acceptance of it is key to lessening the effect of it, to lessening the chokehold that suffering has on it. So again, in a world where some suffering is inevitable, the only sensible thing is to learn how to deal with it. Certainly exercising, eating well, staying strong, they also help us to become tough, which is also known as being resilient. Rule number 5, get the small picture. People who suffer do not have to suffer all the time. Rosenthal, he was a man who was killed at Auschwitz, triumphed over evil through his ability to control that part of his life, his inner life, and its outward expression. So you can have a different life on the inside of yourself than what is going on around you. And that comes by being able to control your response to what's going on around you, or how you're affected by what's going on around you. And that's not to oversimplify certain situations that are extraordinary and extreme. But for those where we do have some capacity to control our inner experience, then we really want to be able to do this. This is about finding at least one thing every day that is yours and that is in your control and that you can feel good about. So this idea of saying, this is mine, I have control over this process, I can make something good happen, I can give myself a goodie, as it were, is a great way to help us to get through days that otherwise might be quite long and strange and challenging. And then sometimes we can work our way up to having 2 things that are good and 3 things that are good. Rule number 6, put things in their place. Traumatic memories don't go away. Rituals are one way of controlling when and how you experience them. If the memories are encapsulated in a ritual time and place, they are less able to torment you the rest of the time. So this is really about recognizing the idea that our human species is not meant to forget our traumas. They stay with us. We can't erase them away. I mean, I suppose lots of people try to do that with various and sundry psychoactive agents, whether it be prescribed or otherwise. But at the end of the day, the traumatic things that happen to us are part of us. They're part of the quilt that is our life, and we're not meant to forget them, and ideally we can get something useful out of them. So accepting this, that they don't go away, these traumas don't go away, the memories of the traumas don't go away, but we do have means at our disposal for controlling how we're impacted by them. So then rather than having these traumatic events choke us, we can help them to sit more quietly beside us. And really that's what it's about. It's not about erasing our histories, but it really is about developing a different relationship with that same history so we don't feel beholden to it or overcome by it. This is about taking control of your well-being. It's about pushing back when you feel yourself being pulled in those spaces of despair. Those spaces of despair, that place that we often call depression, is super tempting, and it is a major sort of pitfall or hazard for a lot of people. And it does not have to be, though, that if we are actively working to compartmentalize and working on compartmentalizing, if we're not really good at that, then we really can get to a place where we can push back, not be sucked into that vortex of despair, and that we do this through controlling our own well-being. And this is really about facing our fears so we can be prepared to meet challenges, the challenges of the realities that we're embroiled in. We can meet these head on. This is about replacing the irrational with the rational, and that's about coping, right? So we talked about this last week as well. This is about being honest about what's going on around us without succumbing to it. So acknowledging, not indulging. This is about replacing the irrational with the rational. So if we live in a cloud of avoidance and denial, it's much more difficult to be present with the actual reality. And if we're not present with the reality, we're going to be much more vulnerable to it. So as soon as we think we're not vulnerable, we're usually 10 times more vulnerable. So again, this is about facing fear so we can be prepared to meet challenges as they arise. And it's about replacing the irrational with the rational, again, so we can meet those challenges and so we can cope at the end of the day. Rule number 7, work, work, work. Staying busy is the most effective means of adaptation from trauma. Stay busy every minute of the day. Some people might argue against this, saying that we need to be able to be with what's going on and we need to be able to rest and regroup. And absolutely, I agree with that as well. But there are some times when our best friend is to be on the move, that if we stop, then we might fall. And falling is not necessarily a good thing at certain times for some people. They feel they can't get up. So if you're in that place where you feel you do need to keep going in order to keep moving, in order to keep going, then that's not a bad thing. Is recognizing that as a useful coping technique is not a bad thing. Survivors turn fear into anger and anger into action. This is really about capitalizing on the value of structure and routine. These are our best pals, and they're especially our best pals when we're really struggling. So we are creatures of habit. We do like structure. We do like routine. We're not good as we talked about that metaphor way back early in the course about making jello outside of the mold, and that generally creates a mess and nothing more. So we do like structure. We do like routine, and we can definitely use these to our advantage, especially when we're in the early stages of trying to recover from something highly traumatic. This rule is about using activity to stave off despair, and it's about allowing us to feel we have control, and it's about actively creating our own well-being. Again, it's about striking balance. So understand there will become times when we do need to rest, we need to slow down, but there are also times when we need to realize that if we do that, if we stop, then we might fall and have a hard time getting back up again. Rule number 8, see one, do one, teach one. So see one is about visualizing. It's about where we want to go. It's about who we want to be. Do one is about this idea of work, 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 the value of structure and routine. And teach one is about altruism. This is about doing for someone other than yourself. This is about taking ourselves outside of ourselves and our own place, our own misery. And this allows us to practice the posture being a rescuer and not a victim. This is really also about cultivating gratitude. If we sort of look around us and see how fortunate we are in relation to what's going on with other people, if someone has it much worse than we do, then we can feel grateful, and that's not a bad thing. Feeling grateful for something we have, that if we see someone with something that's much worse than what we're experiencing, that's not a bad thing, and we can use that to help us to help others. So having a higher purpose in our efforts can take us out of ourselves, and it can make us feel more effective, more in control, and more powerful. And when we feel vulnerable, when we feel afraid, we don't want to feel more vulnerable because we feel like we're out of control. So if we have purpose, we have meaning, we're actually doing, then we can actually feel as though we're in control, therefore less vulnerable, therefore more able. Rule number 8. Touch someone, rule number 9, touch someone. Staying socially connected is one of the most important and effective adaptations. This means staying close to family and friends and making a decision to be with people who have the right attitudes. In our current situation of social distancing and social isolation, this might be really tricky for some. If you're on your own, you're not living with somebody, you don't have roommates, you're not with family, this might be really, really tough for you to do. If you have a pet, that's great, because pets can also help us. Cats, dogs, and others can also help us. That's physical contact with another live being. But if you are on your own, it's really important to find ways to create new ways of having social connection, even though that physical touch is temporarily not available to us. So as we saw when we studied the self and the self in relation, strong social connections are really key to good health and overall well-being. We are social creatures. We do exist best in some kind of state of social connectedness, and so our capacity to be in solid, strong social relations is really good, again, for our overall health and well-being. Physical touch, we've known, lots of studies have shown us that physical touch is key to our well-being, and again, even when the alive connections we have are a cat or a dog, it's not a person's, these are definitely some kind of touch that are useful to us, and some kind of touch overall is really good for thriving and surviving and thriving. Rule number 10, be grateful. Whatever the survival event was, you're here to deal with it. This is about recognizing that you're alive. Even when a traumatic event has left lasting effects, being alive is cause for celebration, for only the living can celebrate. This is about using gratitude to enable you to move forward. It's about using gratitude to enable you to enjoy more than breathing in and breathing out. So there is life after trauma. There is life after adversity. This is really about sort of taking ourselves beyond that. I'm alive. I can move forward. Being grateful is also about helping yourself to avoid the trap of self-pity. So that is very much like the vortex of despair that can pull us all down. Practicing gratitude, exercises of whatever kind work for you, is really a great way to help us to pull ourselves out of those places where it can get quite dark, in pits of despair and self-pity. Rule number 11, walk the walk. Act as if you're better. Find small things that you can do that give you a sense of being normal. So when you have been outside of your realm of normal, when your life has been upended and turned upside down, you can feel as though you are living on the margins. You're outside of the norm. You're outside of the realm, is that you're not part of things anymore. That it's almost like you've been parachuted to another reality. It can feel quite surreal, as though things that are going on around you are happening to others and you're not part of that reality. Acting as though you are okay can help to make you feel as though you are part of the common reality and less isolated, less distance from that. So for some, this is about faking it until you make it. In the beginning, this might be about faking it, but eventually, and with some persistence, your efforts will turn to a time when you feel like you're actually making it, when you believe that you are again genuinely part of things, and you are, back into, as it were, the status quo. This is about calling on your inner grit to allow you to make a conscious decision to pick yourself up and to carry on. If you are here, if you have a pulse, if you have made it, then that's the ideal thing to do, is just keep going, to keep moving. This is about choosing to create well-being, and this is about doing so with ownership and intention. Rule number 12, life is deep, shallow up. Humor is essential. Laugh at the world, laugh at yourself. Having a strong circle of friends and family helps with this. Sometimes in groups that are suffering as a collective, the use of dark humor can be quite cathartic. All you need to do is get onto social media to see this, as there are some groups that are, you might think their humor is inappropriate or misplaced, but in certain times people turn to dark humor. Certainly I know that in bygone days when I was working in frontline crisis mental health services, there was a lot of dark humor floating around, and it was a way of coping with realities that were sometimes just really too difficult to bear. And so not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's well placed and it's not doing harm, not necessarily a bad thing. Crying is good as well, right? This is this belief in that we do have to be sad sometimes as well. So this is about embracing the full range of our emotions. It's about embracing the ebb and flow, our movement through our various states of being as we respond to what we've been through, what we're going through, and a future that we cannot see. This is about embracing without judgment our human condition and the various responses we have to our traumas and to our adversities. And so this is really a tricky one for some. Some people can really fall into that trap of referring to their emotions and their emotional responses as symptoms of that are indicating some sort of state of disorder. And we really want to resist that, because no matter what the scenario is, no matter how severe it is, the science does not support a medicalized approach to how we respond to our adversities and our traumas. So really, again, to emphasize, this is really about embracing without judgment the full range of our human conditions, the various responses that we have to our traumas and adversities, embracing and accepting the fact that our responses are natural and expected to our traumas and adversities based on our own histories, our own experiences, and that the full range of our humanness is all part of that larger spectrum of quote-unquote normal. So we've taken quite a journey in this course. We started by asking some questions about good versus bad mental health and examining the notions of well-being and resilience. Then we moved on to this notion of suffering, and we talked about its ubiquitous nature and the essential role it plays in our personal development. Then we looked at meaning and purpose and how these are key ingredients in our capacity to have a sense of overall well-being. Next, we looked at the self and the self in relation, and this idea that to be in good relation with others, we need to be able to be in good relation with ourselves. Then we moved on to a look at resilience and well-being and forces that oppose these. And in this section, we talked about the burdens and barriers that are imposed by various sources of marginalization, and how these can intrude upon resilience and prevent well-being. We looked then at creativity, and we identified this as an essential feature of our capacity to be nimble and resourceful problem solvers, especially when we find ourselves confronted by extraordinary events. So we looked at creativity beyond the idea of the arts and artistic expression, and we looked at it as an essential feature of resilience and well-being for all people, and makes us able to figure things out, to problem solve, and to sort of get ourselves out of trying circumstances. Then we looked at some of the psychosocial factors that promote resilience, and how being honest about our realities while being optimistic about our futures as a state of being is a key to surviving experiences of trauma and adversity. And we have seen that we can live with both personal disorder, lack of order, temporary lack of order, and resilience at the same time, that these are not either or states of being, that we are not either resilient or well, or disordered or unwell, that we can be disordered and well at the same time. We can feel disordered and well at the same time. So we can feel as though there is a lack of order in ourselves and in our lives and still have well-being. But we know this requires something of a dance on our part, and this is a movement that takes us between states of this personal dis-order and personal states of resilience, and that this is a state of ebbing and flowing, and very much this is all okay, and it's all normal, and it does not indicate some kind of a bipolar pathology. It's very much our normal, especially when we're in the throes of something extraordinary, as all of us are in today. And we know that we can experience disorder and an overall sense of well-being at once. This is something of a combination state. This is not about a state of abnormality. It means that we're vital and that we're coping and that we're working to manage and we are growing. And that even if that back and forth state happens over and over and over again all day, every day, it just means that we're coping, we're working to manage, and that we're growing. It does not mean that we are ill or that we are unwell or that we are disordered. It means that we're doing okay and we're getting through the day. So on January 6th, the date of our first class, I asked you to break into small groups to discuss 3 questions. Question number 1 was, what does resilience mean to you? Question number 2, what does well-being mean to you? And question number 3 is, what are your thoughts on this notion of creating well-being? And I hope throughout this course that you've had a lot of opportunity to revisit these 3 questions, and that you've had an opportunity to sort of think about what these ideas mean to you, what resilience means, what well-being means to you, what this idea of creating well-being means to you. And further to that, I shared at that time on that January 6th class, I shared my personal tagline, and I told you that it was a primary source of inspiration for this course. And that tagline again is, well-being is not prescribed, it is created with ownership and intention. And really, at the end of the day, I hope this journey we've taken together has encouraged you to brace this idea. And that idea is this: is with ownership and with intention, all of us can create our own well-being. And really, I do wish all of you the very best in doing so in your own lives. This marks the end of our course. This marks the end of this term. I extend the best of wishes to all of you. I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay well. And I hope I get to see you again in another course.